CPI numbers are in and they are hotter than expected. What does this mean for tomorrow's interest rate announcements from the Fed? And how does one position their investments in an increasingly uncertain global landscape? You asked, we listened. The legendary Bob Moriarty is back with us today.
Welcome to Inside the Vault with SWP. Join Mark Yaxley as we explore the latest news, reports, and some bullion basics for investors old and new. Let's get to it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inside the Vault with SWP. Happy to have you with us today as we dive into the world of precious metals with the brightest minds in the space. If you've joined us before, thank you for your support. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. You can find all of our previous episodes posted on the Strategic Wealth Preservation YouTube channel, along with a host of other great educational content centered around precious metals investing. I'm your host, Jeremy Varlow. Another great episode today. As I mentioned, we have got the legendary Bob Moriarty back with us. He will join us very shortly, but let's turn it over to CEO of SWP, Mark Yaxley, for his weekly market update. Mark, take it away.
Hey, Jeremy. Welcome back, Bob. Great to have Bob with us today. I know he's got a lot to cover. I'm going to speak a little bit about the Fed. I don't know if Bob's going to talk about that today, but they're struggling with inflation. It kind of all got rehashed in the news this week. The cost of labor for U.S. companies accelerated in the first quarter of 2024 at the fastest pace in over a year and a half, adding to the Fed's struggles to control inflation. The employment cost index rose 1.2% in Q1. They reported on Tuesday. This was the largest increase since the third quarter of 2022 and exceeded the 1% forecast by a number of analysts that were polled by the Wall Street Journal. Compensation costs have come down from the multi-decade high of 5.1% in 2022, but they remain far too high at 4.2% total for the last 12 months for the Fed to get comfortable with, because these ever increasing employment costs are helping drive up inflation, which is basically working against the Fed's agenda. Ideally, the Fed would like to see those employment costs rising at about 3%. The dollar's strength continues to rise or remains strong, hovering at 106 on the US dollar index, the Dixie. And that is exerting pressure on gold, silver, and other commodities. Gold has fallen from recent record highs and is now testing the $2,300 mark, priced in US dollars. Silver has also declined about 10% from its mid-April highs. The metals are going to need some relief in the form of a weaker US dollar or renewed escalations in the Middle East to recoup their recent losses. The Fed does meet this week, Jeremy, and is expected to maintain a hawkish stance on interest rate cuts. Persistent inflation and a strong US dollar have thwarted earlier expectations of rate reductions. Markets had been hopeful that rates would be cut in June, but it's now looking like September, and who knows, it might be higher for longer beyond September at this point. Investors in precious metals, I believe, should expect continued pullbacks in the very short term, presenting them with buying opportunities. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
Thank you for that, Mark. Time to bring in our guest. And as I mentioned, we have a special one today. Bob Moriarty is back with us on the show. Bob is an author of both finance and investing guides, as well as the chronicles of his own experiences as a U.S. Marine pilot in Vietnam. Bob is also the founder of 321 Gold and 321 Energy, which feature articles, updates on global events affecting both sectors. Further, Bob is also widely respected for his insights into geopolitics and world events. Bob, welcome back to the show. Good to have you on.
We certainly have some interesting things to discuss.
We do, and let's jump right into those. I want to start, Mark mentioned the prices of metals throughout his market update. We've seen a really great start to 2024, kind of on the back of a very solid 2023. Mark mentioned that gold is, right around that $2,300 mark right now. Silver trading at about $2,650. I'm curious if you could give us kind of your high-level overview of the run we've seen over the last couple of months And, this recent pullback, should we expect more, or, where do you think metals are headed in the near term here?
We're clearly in a correction as we speak. Silver's down 70 cents and gold is down $40. However, there are things going on in the background that are so significant that I think that a minor correction is absolutely meaningless. I would highly encourage all investors, take a look at Stockhouse or Stockwatch and look at the volume of shares of the junior mining companies. And the fact is, there isn't any volume. Resource stocks are as hated as I've ever seen in my life. Now, Mark is well aware of my primary tool that I use for determining when to buy silver. Mark, can you throw that in?
Well, you would be buying silver when, from my experience, when the majority of silver investors are selling silver.
Nope.
No, I got it wrong. I knew I was going to get that wrong.
I've got an advisor. Who's my advisor?
Me.
Exactly. And what did you tell me when silver was $23 an ounce?
What did I tell you in silver was $23 an ounce? I probably was telling you that we were seeing a lot of people selling silver at that point.
You said you had some silver bars for sale at a good price.
Yeah.
And what do I always do when you give me good advice?
You're giving me way too much credit here, Bob.
Wait a minute. I'm talking about the last time we had a chat. I said you were my number one best sentiment indicator. A couple of months ago, you called me up. Silver was $23. You said, Bob, we got some silver for sale. Do you want some? I said yes. And I sent you some money and you gave me some silver. Now, silver actually went down to $22, remember?
Yes, it probably did. See, that's funny. I always tell people you're my advisor, so it's funny that you're saying this.
You're gonna get people right here on your tongue when you tell stories. You're my advisor. I'm not your advisor.
All right.
But let's get into what is probably the most important gold news story I've ever heard. Okay. As you're well aware, many countries store their gold in the United States. In the last 10 days, 8 countries have told the Treasury they want their gold back. And I'll give you the names. Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Senegal, Algeria, all of which are minor players in gold, and Saudi Arabia, which is not a minor player. Now, do you have any idea of why these guys want their gold back?
Yeah, I mean that was the question that I wanted to ask you in particular, because I mean it definitely is alarming. Whether or not there's a reason for it, I'm sure you have the answers for us.
Well, here's what happened, and it happened about 10 days ago. If you can imagine in your mind a community of about 200 groups, some rich, some poor, some big, some small. And one of the big guys starts stealing from one of the other big guys. Would you want to protect yourself so he doesn't steal from you?
Certainly so.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is obvious. But what's really scary is, where does it go from there? Now, 10 days ago, as part of the $91 or $96 billion government giveaway to Israel and to Ukraine and to Taiwan, was a provision that the United States is confiscating $5 billion of Russian assets, and they're going to sell those and use that to defray payments owed by Ukraine for armaments. That's what caused it. But let's go one step further. If part of your assets are in gold and you tell them you want that sent back to you, what other assets do you have that you might want to protect from the United States stealing?
I would assume, cash or cash equivalents as well.
Treasury notes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the gold is such a small market. Nobody ever wants to admit this, but you can go to the BIS and look at the list of derivatives, and gold and silver are right there. They are the smallest of small derivatives. I mean, I think the Canadian dollar is a bigger derivative than gold, which should give you an idea of how important gold is in today's economy. However, if these 8 countries demand their cash back, the US dollar is going to go right into the toilet. I have seen things happen in the last 2.5 years that scare the hell out of me because they are so stupid. I wrote a piece about 10 days after the Ukraine war started, and I said the US, NATO, and the EU were committing suicide with the sanctions against Russia. Now, 2.5 years later, clearly the United States, the EU, and NATO have been damaged by the sanctions, and Russia has not been damaged by the sanctions. So that was literally suicide. And the Chancellor of Germany actually was told, hey, by the way, the US is going to blow up Nord Stream. We know it was the US. How many pipelines were there?
There was 2.
4.
Not 4.
Okay, you had Nord Stream 1. That was 2 pipelines. You had Nord Stream 2, and now it's 2 pipelines. Now, of the 4 pipelines, how many were destroyed?
I think we went through this last time, and I got it incorrect as well. 3?
Thank you. Now, what does that tell you about the competency of the military that tried to blow up 4 pipelines? It tells you they're incompetent, okay? We've got men who think they're women. We've got women who think they're men. We've got the Secretary of Defense who doesn't recognize genocide when he sees it. We've got the Secretary of State saying the war in Ukraine is a win-win for the United States because of all the good, high-paying jobs. And of course, it's cost somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million Ukrainians their lives. And I got a question. What's the ratio? How many Ukrainians are we willing to kill to generate 1 job? And Blinken hasn't said that. He just came back from China, and the Chinese were really funny. Do you know how many Chinese officials greeted him when its airport landed?
No idea.
None.
Wow, snubbed.
Okay. That'll tell you what the United States is thought of in China right now. So the United States is literally committing suicide, and it would be a really good time to call up Mark and say, Mark, what do you think about the price of silver? He's who I use as an advisor, and frankly, he's a lot smarter than I am.
Oof, that's a stretch, Bob, but I'll take it.
So, Bob, I want to go back to the moving gold outside of the U.S. here. So, what are the direct implications of this? What does this kind of signal to the world in general? But what these countries that are doing so, is this a signal to other countries that maybe now is the time to have a little bit less reliance on the US?
You think? When 8 countries do the same thing in a 10-day period in response to actions by the United States, they are just the start of an avalanche, okay? The direct consequences are everybody that's got gold could demand it be shipped back to them. But the indirect consequences, such as people dumping their treasury bills and treasury notes and treasury bonds, would be absolutely catastrophic. Now, you would use the term that the Fed chairman used earlier, higher for longer. And my opinion, it's just my opinion, is we're not going to see rate cuts this year. We're going to see rate increases, if anything. And the gold could be the canary in the coal mine, and we could have catastrophic results very quickly. I'll just raise another issue that really scared the pants off me. Let me do a little searching
Well,
here.
you are wearing pants right now, right? Like, just to
No, I never do interviews with pants. Why would I wear pants? You can't see me. Okay, this comes from Hal Turner Radio Show, halturnerradioshow.com. If NATO troops enter Ukraine, nukes will hit NATO decision-making centers. An official Russian spokesman went on television yesterday and said, if NATO brings troops into Ukraine, we're going to nuke the decision-making centers. We are closer to World War III than we have ever been before, and 99.9% of the public is totally oblivious to it. I went through the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and the United States was well aware we were on the verge of World War III. Today, nobody cares, okay? But there are extremely dangerous things happening, and all of the things we've ever talked about, gold as money, gold as an insurance policy, having physical gold, is more true today than it's ever been. It's literally time to head for the bunker with some Krugerrands in your pocket.
Now, I've got a question about this because, I mean, I don't want to count myself in the 99% because I'm clearly following what's going on between Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Hamas and Iran and whatnot. But it would appear to me, and this is me presuming that there are, relatively sane people in charge here, but nobody.
What did
exactly.
You just say?
I was afraid that you might react that way, but nobody wants a nuclear war of any kind. That it's obviously detrimental to everyone involved in the whole global population. So I mean, like, you would assume that there would be either solutions to this or that a war would be fought in a different sort of arena. I mean, I think it was Christopher Wray the other day who said that China could attack U.S. telecommunications and internet. It seems like wars might be fought more on that frontier than with the nuclear option. And I'm just kind of curious, like, is that really a reality that nukes will drop in a situation like this?
Well, if NATO troops enter Ukraine to inflict strategic defeat upon Russia, everything will fly. Now, let me go you one better, okay? And my only criticism of what you just said is you're giving me the mainstream media version of reality. If you want to understand what's going on in the world, you need to pay clear attention daily to the mainstream media. and listen to it carefully and make sure you understand what they're saying. And when they say something like Israel defeated Iran because they shot down 230 drones and cruise missiles, you will know that that's a lie. They lied about 9/11. They lied about COVID. They lied about the great financial crisis. They lied about Ukraine. The media is lying about everything. So if you listen to the media, you know exactly what to believe, and that's anything except what they say. The United States has troops in Ukraine right now. I have seen videos. Clearly, they're Americans and probably special forces. The French absolutely have troops in Ukraine right now. Now, if you're going to consider the two sides, which side advocates more war and which side wants negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the actions of the U.S. over the past, I don't even know how many years. There seems to always be, a war that they don't mind getting involved in.
Well, they started this war, okay, and it really didn't start in 2022, and it didn't even start in 2014. It started in 1945. The United States has been war against Russia and the USSR since 1945, okay? And then Victoria Nuland spent $5 billion of American taxpayer money orchestrating a coup d'etat in 2014. And then that government, at the direction of the United States, started attacking Donbass and killed 14,000 people. Now, the funny thing is, when I talk to people and I do interviews, somebody always says, gee, Moriarty is good about finance, but he doesn't understand geopolitics. I spent 2 years in war. I am pretty good at geopolitics. The Russians and the Chinese have advocated discussions and negotiations, and Zelensky and Johnson and the United States and NATO and Finland and Sweden are advocating more combat. I'll make one thing absolutely clear, and that's spoken as a guy who spent 20 months in combat. The Ukrainians lost this war 2 years ago, okay? There is no way they are ever going to win. The Russians have better equipment. They have more equipment. They have better leadership. The Ukrainians are never going to do anything to Russia that's going to hurt Russia. But it's killed somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million Ukrainians. We need to end this war. And the United States just threw $61 billion down a rat hole. And they're saying Russia is the enemy. Russia is not the enemy. What did Russia do that made them the enemy of Finland or Sweden? The Swiss are talking about confiscating $15 billion of Russian money. This is Switzerland, okay? Switzerland is known for being neutral. How come they hate Russia? Russia is their neighbor. So the world has gone totally insane. It's ruled by a bunch of religious nutcases and fools, and we're very close to World War III.
That's incredibly interesting. I want to take a minute to pivot away from geopolitics, I suppose, and talk a little bit more about the global economic landscape. Something that I've been following recently, and this is going back a few months now, is Japan and the yen versus the dollar. We saw the ratio of yen to dollars touch 160, which is the highest in decades. And the last few days, in a big negative move for Japan. Regulators there are obviously working overtime to stabilize the dollar. And you mentioned U.S. Treasuries before. They're obviously selling off U.S. Treasuries to strengthen their dollar. I'm curious to know how closely you're following this and what a further sell-off of U.S. Treasuries means for the United States in general.
Well, if the countries that are withdrawing their gold from the United States withdraw their cash, from the U.S. Treasury, it means the dollar just died. And I'm not talking hyperbole. I mean, it would be dead, and it clearly would be dead. We could go into hyperinflation virtually overnight. Now, financially throughout the world's bankrupt. It should have gone bankrupt in 2008, and the Fed papered over it. And then it should have gone bankrupt in 2020 with the whole COVID pandemic, okay, which was total fraud right from the very beginning. And it's only obviously fraud now. But since 2020, we have increased the debt of Americans by $11 trillion. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to admit sometimes I am totally, utterly clueless. I don't know how the United States is increasing their deficit $1 trillion every 3 months. How the hell are they spending the money? Where is it going? If you know, fill me in, because I'm clueless. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom numbers like that. I don't know, Mark, were you going to jump in there?
Well, I would guess a large portion goes to their defense budget, and another large portion goes to healthcare and other social services. They seem to be
Yeah, but it's not defense. Okay, they just threw $61 billion down a hole to Ukraine and $26 trillion or $1 billion down to Israel. But that's chump change. When you're increasing your deficit $300 billion a month, where's it going? I mean, what has happened? I literally, I don't think anybody has discussed it. Where's all this money going? I know they're doing stupid things, but 61 billion is stupid, but it's not 300 billion a month. Okay.
Yeah,
you could buy fair. Ukraine. You could buy Ukraine and Gaza for that kind of money.
So I want to stay in Asia a little bit, Bob. Let's talk about China. Obviously, we've seen, the gold price really, ramping up in the form of Chinese buying, both, central banks as well as just retail investors within China. What do you make of this? You talk a lot about the U.S. hegemony kind of falling away and a new world superpower stepping in. But obviously the U.S. or the Chinese economy is not in a great place right now. So, who steps into this role, and, where do we go from here?
That is a really, really, really good question. Okay. I'm going to say something that people are only beginning to realize. The West no longer has control of the price of gold and silver. The price of gold and silver is now set in Shanghai, okay? And that's a big deal. And of course, in China, what has collapsed financially in China?
The real estate market.
Thank you. Okay, so if you've been in the real estate money and you've still got some money left, what do?
Buy cheap real estate? Buy gold?
10,000 comedians out of work in Cayman, and Jeremy wants to be funny. How about you head for the bunker with some Krugerrands in your head? The Chinese clearly are reacting to the real estate crash in China. Of course, in the United States, we've got $200 million buildings selling for $3.5 million at auction. Okay. And Americans still don't get it. Okay. The Chinese get it. Okay. They know their real estate's in deep, serious trouble. So what they're doing is they're going for the ultimate form of money, the ultimate insurance policy, and that's gold. And I've got somebody I'm in contact with. Let me see if I can bring this up. I went out and said, I want to see a chart of Shanghai compared to New York and London, and he sent it to me. Absolutely no question. The Chinese control the price of gold and silver now.
Well, I'm also curious. I asked this question. I can't recall if it was of Rick Rule last week or a couple weeks prior, but we were talking about the price of metals, and you talk about derivatives a lot as well. And I had read on Twitter a thread of somebody talking about the price of gold being manipulated over the years and whether or not this Chinese buying would kind of uncover how the price had been manipulated in the West over the years. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, if you think that the price of metals have been manipulated over the past couple of decades, and whether or not we'll see that come unraveled.
Okay, you can help me out here. I need you to name a financial market that is not manipulated.
I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I can do that.
And why would that be?
Well, I feel like, particularly because of derivatives, they've become so hard to understand that that manipulating them has become much easier.
Yeah.
Bob, I have an answer too. I read this. I forget. This is. I'm going to butcher this quote, but every time you have a dollar introduced in a transaction between two human beings, you begin to have manipulation. Is something along those lines. That humans can't transact with each other without trying to cheat each other, essentially.
Did you make that up?
No, I read that a while ago. It might have been you, actually. Did you write that?
I don't think it was me. But all financial markets are manipulated, and they're manipulated all the time. As you just pointed out, if there is a financial transaction, each party is trying to outsmart the other. Now, the key is not whether markets are manipulated. Markets are absolutely manipulated, and they're manipulated all the time. The key is, does it make any difference? And my answer is no. We know interest rates are manipulated. We know currencies are manipulated. The Dow and the S&P are probably manipulated. Derivatives, oh God. Okay, that's so corrupt. The only thing more corrupt than derivatives is cryptocurrencies. Okay, you have 10,000 different cryptocurrencies, and some fool believes every one of them is going to succeed. And I'm going, really? How they going to do that? Okay, but here's the key about manipulation. Everybody needs to know. For you to believe that manipulation is important in the price of anything, it means you have to reject supply and demand. And I took Economics 101. I got an A in the course, and I believe supply and demand is important, so I ignore manipulation. And people hate me for it. I'm supposed to say, oh, God, gold's manipulated. Well, yeah, the sun comes up in the east too. So what?
Yeah, that's the perfect answer. I want to wrap this up here, Bob. Thank you again for your time. In closing, what advice do you have for our viewers on how to navigate this uncertain world, how to make the most of their investments, and protect their wealth also?
Well, strange enough, and you guys are a major contribution to this, not just in what you do to earn a living, but the alternative media is becoming more and more important. I think the average person in the United States believes in the mainstream media is down to 6 or 7%. They know intuitively they're being lied to, and they're lied to all the time. Now, I'm not one of those guys who says the alternative media is always accurate. I would say on average, the alternative media is full of crap about 50% of the time. But that's good. okay? Because the mainstream media is full of crap 100% of the time. So if you're only full of crap half the time, that's a really good thing. Substack, John Rubino. There are so many really great sites now that give good information from intelligent people. And quite bluntly, Mark, you can help me out here. When you guys started, Barbara and I were what? First, second, third, fifth customer?
Yeah, definitely of the first five. I think Jeff Clark always tries to tell people he was first. I think he was actually second. You guys were probably third after Jeff. Yeah.
Okay, so I am not recommending keeping gold and silver offshore. I'm saying if you want to preserve your wealth, first of all, you need to have some in your hand. And second of all, once you get past that, you need to have some offshore. And 8 countries have just said, that Moriarty, he really got it right. Let's get our gold and silver offshore. But 2024 is an exceptionally dangerous year, and it's going to be catastrophic for a lot of people. It is not a time to be out doing dangerous things. It's a time to hunker down and protect yourself and protect your family and protect your wealth.
Amazing, Bob. Thank you very much for that. In closing, Bob, always a pleasure. Look forward to having you on again soon. It's always a good time and an interesting and entertaining conversation. Thank you again.
Well, I was really interested in your contribution to comedy. And all I could say is whatever you do, don't give up your day job.
Yeah, my wife has told me much the same. All right, let's turn it over to Mark for his weekly segment that we like to call Bullion Basics. Mark, how can you educate us today?
Yeah, so Bob said earlier that I was his go-to guy for advice on buying gold and silver. I still dispute that claim, but what I'm about to say is along those lines. So one thing I've never claimed, Jeremy, in my whole career is that I'm a technical analyst. And what I'm about to say is far from being technical, but it's rather a trend that I've noticed over my 18 years in the way that gold and silver by default perform. And the reason I'm bringing this up today is because we are in a pullback. Bob mentioned it as well. It's become pretty clear. And we all know over the long term that gold tends to appreciate in value. As Rick Rule pointed out on the podcast last week, it works out to about an 8% return, I think, over the long term annually for gold, which is a really great number because it matches or beats real inflation, annual inflation, which is about 7.5%. Annually. But when you look at a long-term gold chart, say from the year 2000 onwards, what you notice about gold's performance is that in most years, it's actually relatively flat. It even tends to trend down. It really only appreciates in value, gives you a strong return about 3 or 4 years out of the decade. As we saw from 2008 through 2011, and as we saw again in 2020 now through 2024. So we're in a pretty long bull run at the moment, actually. But if you narrow down the timeline to a shorter term outlook, like we're talking 3 to 6 months, you can even focus in on like week to week trading trends. You'll notice that it's rarely a straight line for gold. And instead, what you're going to notice is what I call the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's what we're seeing right now. Gold and silver have taken 2 big steps forward since the beginning of 2024. And now we're seeing a fairly large retracement or a big step back. Gold's back about 6% from its all-time high, and silver is back, like I said earlier, about 10%, even more today, down another $1 on the day. But both have established, and this is the good news and what I'm getting at, both have established a new floor. Gone are the days of $1,900 gold. Gone are the days of $20 silver. I don't think we'll ever see silver under $20 an ounce again in my lifetime. That's my prediction, Bob. I might be wrong. But I think it's unlikely we're going to see those prices again. And we don't know when the next step forward is going to be for gold. It's always hard to predict when that is going to occur. The periods of price consolidation can be very lengthy at times. This could be a 1 month, 2 month event where we see the gold price slowly retracing or settling into a new range. If we don't see any major developments on the inflation front, if we don't see any major developments on the geopolitical front. Now, Bob listed a myriad of good things or good reasons that the price of gold and silver can go up again, but I'm just saying it could take a little bit of time. So my advice here to pull this all together is, if you're an investor, pull out your calculator, pull out your pencils and paper, do some math, and see if you can make a purchase during this pullback period. And if you're lucky enough, depending on your personal situation, you might even be able to make 2 or 3 purchases during this consolidation period. And basically what you're going to be doing, as Bob referred to earlier, is you're going to be getting silver at a good price. You're going to be cost averaging down your purchases most likely, which is much better than buying in the up market or at the top of the market, as we saw a lot of people doing recently. So that's my bullion basics for this week, Jeremy.
Thank you again, Mark. That is all for us today. Thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you to Bob Moriarty once again for joining us. Check out more of Bob's work at 321 Gold and 321 Energy. Also, head on over to the Strategic Wealth Preservation YouTube channel, where we have all of our previous shows, as well as tons of other educational content. And please make sure to like and subscribe while you're there. And also, if you are interested in learning more about precious metals investing, do send an email to info@swpcayman.com, and a member of our team will happily assist you. Until next week, stay safe and happy investing.
Thank you for listening to Inside the Vault, the podcast that opens the door to precious metals. We hope you learned something new and enjoyed the show. See you next time on Inside the Vault with SWP.